What is up, folks? Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. The playoffs are here, and we're going to break down the wide receiver playoff preview using our slot versus wide analysis. We hope all of our listeners have made the playoffs, but we're here. We're going to break down some notable starts, sits, and streamers. All this and more starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And it is Friday night, folks, here in the States, and it's Saturday morning down in Australia. And by the way, I know we have a really comfortable relationship, but today it's time. It's week 15. It's fantasy playoffs. We're calling you Benjamin. I'm Robert. We're getting super sophisticated today, folks, because it is an important week for fantasy football, and there's nobody else in the world, not even like the United States, the world, I want to be talking to on a Friday night. Start, sits, and streamers for wide receivers. It's Ben Wisely. Ben, what's going on, man?
Hey, look, it is an important week for fantasy football, and nobody told the 49ers and Rams.
No one did.
You've got to check them in. Come on. That was absolutely ridiculous. Look, I admit I didn't have a lot of 49ers and Rams, but I had enough that I'm upset and disappointed. What is going on?
Yeah, Cooper Kupp. It's one of those things where, like, you don't want to overthink it. You don't want to sit your studs unless there's a reason. But, man, the slot versus wide analysis after that game was like, hey, how'd that Cooper Kupp start go, Bobo? And I'm like, well, slot versus wide analysis, you were right this time, you son of a bitch. Because the 49ers allowed the third fewest fantasy points in the slot, and boy, they did not disappoint. So, unfortunately, I'll take a donut in two of the leagues I am still in the playoffs in, and hopefully, I've called a couple guys up and I said, listen, Cooper, you got to step it up for him. And today's show, we're going to be hopefully finding some of those guys as we talk team by team, game by game. We're going to be doing a start, sit, and streamer. We're talking about everybody today because it's an important week for you folks. But before we even get into the individual games, Ben, has there anything that's really stood out this week for you through your research, through your rankings, kind of somebody maybe you're a little bit excited about before we dive into each individual game?
Oh, a little bit excited. Look, it doesn't take much to get me excited. You know that. But the guy that I'm really excited, I just want to see if he can continue doing what he's been doing. It's Adam Thielen. I talked about this in my Streamers and Stashes article. Like, I just want to know whether this roller coaster ride will continue on the way up. It's every time with Thielen, I'm like, at the moment I just get sucked in and he disappoints me and does something absolutely useless. Last couple of weeks, he's been really good. I kind of saw this coming. He was a stash a few weeks ago. He was a streamer last week. Can he keep this run going? Bobby, can we trust Adam Thielen?
Yeah, it's so the Cowboys last week had their trio of corners for the first time all season, and I know they got roasted by Jamar Chase, but T. Higgins, not much there. Andres Ilisovas, I mean, you can say what you want about him, but you know what? It is what it is. But, like, I honestly think that the Cowboys secondary they're going to stop guys who they should, but they're not talented enough to stop the elite guys. Like, Chase is going to break them apart. Now, Adam Thielen has been solid. I just think that, we have like a 5 for 60 line coming, and take that for whatever you want. Not expecting a league-winning week. In PPR formats, you might get yourself a nice, like, wide receiver 3 week. But the Cowboys aren't necessarily like the slot matchup that you want to completely go after. They have a decent slot corner. And listen, for what it's worth, they still have a little bit to play for. Nothing crazy, of course, because that loss is huge for them. And honestly, I think the Commanders are 8-5. So I think if this is it, they have to win out. The Commanders have to like lose out for them to have a chance. Actually, no, it's not true. Commanders can lose one game, I believe. I'm not 100% sure on that. But anyway, I do think there's a shot. We're going to kind of go into it team by team and kind of break down like the slots, this slot versus wide analysis a little bit too in this process. But to be honest with you, like the toughest thing I always have to figure out is like the slot versus wide analysis is another stepping stone to get you closer to more accurate information versus just fantasy points allowed. But there's like a lot of loopholes, like Lad McConkey, CeeDee Lamb types where they technically are the slot guy, but they are the number one. And the slot versus wide metrics sometimes like it's good for like the pure slot guy. But then you have like the alphas, the guys who technically play a lot in the slot who are more loopholes. And so like that's where I struggle because like Lamb doesn't have a good matchup this week. Cooper Kupp didn't, by the way, folks. But I think the difference between Cooper Kupp is that Puka's the one. And so Lamb is definitely the one. There's no question about it. But they are on the road against Carolina. So I'm going to flip it back over to you, my friend. What do you think about CeeDee Lamb this week? Is he an auto start for you?
I think CeeDee Lamb always has to be an auto start. The Cooper Rush situation is a little bit scary, but you don't love playing slot receivers against Carolina. You can kind of target them out wide a little bit. I think you're just hoping for a touchdown, essentially. I think he's unlikely to give you a big, like, 100-and-something yard game. But I feel like there's a reasonable chance that he gets a whole heap of targets because who else have they got? I think this is probably going to be more of a Jake Ferguson game than anything. You really can target with the tight ends, but I don't know. I don't feel great about anyone but like a Rico Dowdle and Lamb. I'm definitely starting, but I don't love it.
Maybe it's a Lamb mine. No. There we go. All right, close enough. Close enough. It landed all the way across the world, folks, so it better land for you locally, you bastards. Anyway, basically today, we might as well. Cowboys, 40. Listen, we're flexible here. We're just going with the flow today. I basically told Ben, and he can attest to the fact that listen, we're swinging from the hip today, folks. Honestly, let's talk game by game. It's week 15. You guys need as much data and information that any of these two minds could give you, and hopefully you guys can piece those thoughts together and put into the best optimal lineup in the world. So that's what we're hoping for you today. But listen, the Cowboys-Carolina Panthers game, let me just pull up because I'm going a little bit over. There's no notable injuries in this game. And when you're kind of looking at the slot versus wide tool, the Dallas Cowboys, for example, against that, you brought up a really good point. They lean out wide against Carolina is really tough against that slot. But the question is this with the Panthers here, and I just want to pull this up too. And I'm sorry, we're a little out of order, but you know what? I don't care today. We're just winging it. We're going to have a little fun. Ben's on holiday. I got Ben strapped down. He's good. He's not going anywhere, folks. So he's on holiday. He's got nowhere to be. But like just thinking about the notable slot guys they faced over the last few months, nothing really stands out to me when you look at it. Like Wan'Dale Robinson, 5 for 51. Devonta Smith plays a lot in the slot, but he's not like a pure slot guy. He went 4 for 37 and 1 against this team just last week. Sterling Shepard, do we really care about Sterling Shepard's production? Not really, but 4 for 42 as the primary slot guy. And then you have to go like way, way back to like, honestly, even like Chicago, Keenan Allen at that time, do we really care about his production early on in the season? Not really. So sometimes when you have to go above and beyond here for that. So I think Lamb is I'm probably avoiding his props this week. I'm not going to go after any like overs for him. But at the same time, for redraft purposes and especially PPR formats, I think, listen, Cooper Rush, the one thing we noticed last week was they started throwing the ball a little bit further downfield towards him. And I think a lot of the frustration early on in the Cooper Rush tenure was that he doesn't take sacks. He gets the ball out of his hands. That's great. But CeeDee Lamb's ADOT was like 7 yards. And like that's a really tough pill. Half PPR, it's hard to really get there on 7 for 50. That's not going to win you your fantasy week. So we're hoping for a little bit further downfield. Any additional thoughts about that Panthers Cowboys game? Anybody we haven't covered yet?
Firstly, when was the last time the Panthers were a favorite? Like, I reckon
not 2 years. Been like 2 years, yeah.
It has been a while. I also just feel like this is going to be a game where we see a lot of rushing. We're talking about two teams that are both top 5 in points conceded to running backs. So I feel like you're going to see a lot of Dowdle, a lot of Hubbard. And the problem is the more you run the ball, the less plays you get in the game because there's no incompletions. You're going out of play less. So I feel like this could be a game where there's not a lot of yardage, not a lot of plays, a bit of a grind fest, quite low scoring. All of those things are bad for wide receivers. So it's hard to trust anybody, but the one player I would definitely start is Lamb. The one player I would stream would be Thielen. Everyone else to me is a desperation option at best.
So I guess the question is with Thielen, I know, and by the way, people could go to see your rankings. By the way, go to Fantasy First Down. It has all your rankings there as well. So if you want to check that out, we do recommend that. But just for the show's purposes, is there a notable guy, maybe a top 24 wide receiver that you would start Adam Thielen over?
I've got Adam Thielen ranked in the mid-30s at the moment. So okay. There are a lot. So he's very much like a wide receiver 3 flex option. I think the only guys that are surprising that I might start him over is like a Devonta Smith, for example. Maybe a Jaden Reed. Like both of those guys have been like Smith has a terrible matchup. And Reed's a little bit risky, and we'll talk about that more. But that's more to do with Smith and Reed than anything to do with Thielen.
Okay. All right, let's jump to the Commanders and Saints. Let's get ourselves back in order here, folks, for my own sake. Now, Derek Carr is, of course, going to be out. Jake Haener is in for the start. Taysom Hill, of course, has been out for the last week or so. And so that's notable because you're taking away a lot of that run game with Taysom Hill. But they did get healthy Kendra Miller back. And honestly, I got to tell you, watching Kendra Miller, I think he's probably the one guy in dynasty leagues where get him while you can because he is a special runner. Like, he looks awesome. And Kamara just doesn't have it anymore as a runner. You could tell the difference. Just from my eye test, I think Miller's going to start getting a lot of work, especially with the season basically over for the Saints. Still in the hunt. Kamara's still a start. Hear what I'm not saying. I think Kendre Miller, though, is someone I would like to get in dynasty, especially if you're a Saints Kamara owner. I digress. Noah Brown, the notable number 2 for the Commanders, is out for this game, probably for the season as well. They did sign KJ Osborne to take over that role. But honestly, at this point, when you're looking at this matchup, is it really just Terry McLaurin at the receiver position, or is there any other notable names you want to bring up?
Yes, it's just Terry McLaurin. This is another one of those games where it feels like it's going to be a little bit of a grind fest. I think the Saints are going to try to slow this game down as much as possible and rely on their defense and try to keep it really low scoring. You're still going to get enough production out of Jaden Daniels because he's going to run. He's got touchdown upside. I think the Saints are going to do very little with the ball. They're just going to keep it really simple, keep it on the ground, probably all 3 running backs will be involved. They'll use their tight ends a bit. You'll see plenty of Juwan Johnson, but it's not the kind of game where you're going to see Marquez Valdez-Scantling go off for 150 yards. Like, that's just not likely to happen in this case.
Yeah, that is an interesting name to bring up because, Washington has really kind of hunkered down over the last 6 weeks, according to our metric. One of the tougher matchups for receivers overall, but they do lean out wide, so there could be something there. And listen, there's always a chance. By the way, I think Jake Haener might be better than people think. There's just been flashes in the spot duty he's done. Like Spencer Rattler is one thing. But there's something like I kind of feel like there might be a Cooper Rush-esque type play where he's just going to play, get the ball out of his hands, and not mess around too much. And I think that's going to what we'll see. That might help a guy like Juwan Johnson in the tight end position. It also might help Kamara as well, get a few more catches thrown his way. All right, so go to the Chiefs at Browns. Now, there's a couple games which were to be determined. The Browns game might have a little bit of a weather factor in this one, folks. It's high winds, some rain early on in the day, but it's starting to sound like it might dissipate. But, hey, remember that 49ers? By the way, shout out to Apple. And probably this is going to get me canceled or assassinated. Sorry, folks. Probably too soon to say that. But why I'm saying that is because the weather app on Apple told me that the 49ers Rams was going to be perfectly fine. That did not happen. And I was looking at the app like an hour and a half before the game. And I was like, all right, it looks like it's going to be done before the game. We're fine. Nope. Not even close, by the way. Not even close. And so all our Cooper Cups of the world were devastated and because of that. But anyway, I digress. Some notable injuries for this game. Of course, Cedric Tillman been ruled out again. David Njoku also going to be potentially ruled out. Sounds like he is out for this game. And then on the other side of the football, Greg Newsome, the outside cornerback or kind of a hybrid, but plays a little bit of both. Greg Newsome for the Browns is out. Does any of these injuries, and how do you feel about this matchup from a receiver perspective for the Chiefs and Browns?
I think this really helps Jerry Jeudy and also Elijah Moore. You can attack the Chiefs a little bit more over the middle of the field. They concede a lot of points to tight ends. They concede more wide receiver points to the slot. So I feel like that brings Elijah Moore into play as well. He's a streaming option for me. And he's available in a lot of leagues still at the moment. You're not going to get Jeudy anymore. You missed your window. That was a month or two ago. I talked about Jeudy a lot a month or two ago, and hopefully you got him. But if you didn't, Elijah Moore's kind of like a viable alternative option that I think could have a solid game this week. As for the Chiefs, it's just really hard to trust any of the Chiefs receivers. They've got so many guys, they cycle them, they don't play full snap shares, and therefore, as a result, you get a really low floor with all of them. One, maybe two of them will go off every week. It's probably going to be Hopkins or Worthy if it's anybody. The Browns have conceded the 6th most wide receiver points over the course of the season, so there are points available there. But it's really hard to know exactly which wide receiver it goes to, especially if Hollywood Brown comes back, because he has been reactivated to practice. At least. I don't think he'll probably play this week, but it is another name that they'll be adding to the rotation soon enough as well. So I don't trust any of the Chiefs. They're more like low-end desperation starts, but I do like Judy and Moore.
Yeah, I do think Moore is an interesting streamer this week. I mean, talk about a slot funnel. I mean, Jesus, they have allowed 17 fantasy points to the slot on average over the last 6 weeks. And with the injuries, this is what you're kind of set up for. If you've been dealing with injuries all year, kind of streaming your wide receiver threes, rotating guys, like I think it's weather permitting though. Like honestly, Cleveland could change in a heartbeat up there. They always talk about the winds from the lake. And next thing you know, it's all different. So there has been a little rumbling. So just something to monitor. But the matchup is calling. And listen, Judy's the guy. Listen, D-Hop on the outside against the Cleveland Browns. Honestly, I don't think Ward doesn't shadow. So you don't have to necessarily stress too much about Ward shadowing him across the field. But at the same time, listen, I think if you're looking at a comparison, it'd be Cortland Sutton just a few weeks ago, 6 for 102 against Cleveland. So if Cortland Sutton can get it done, I feel like there is a really good chance, for example, that DeAndre can get it done. So I still like DeAndre Hopkins in that matchup as well. All right, Bengals at Titans. This is going to be an interesting game. Of course, the old OC for the Bengals, now the head coach for the Titans. So maybe some familiarity there about how to attack these two defenses. No notable injuries here, Ben. So what's your thoughts about the Bengals at Titans? This one could be a fun one. What's your thoughts?
It's one of those weird ones where the Titans don't concede a lot of points to wide receivers, just the way their defense has been set up this year, which is very strange because that was the total opposite case last year. They've conceded the 2nd fewest points to wide receivers on the season. Now, to be fair, many of the points they have conceded have gone out wide, and they've started to concede slightly more points recently. So that means that you can definitely feel confident in starting a Jamar Chase. And I also feel fine about starting T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins is a solid start as well. And no one's considering Andre Yoshavas anyway. As for the Titans, I feel like Calvin Ridley's a guy you just absolutely have to start. The Bengals do concede a lot of points through the air. It's often to tight ends, but it's not like the Titans are going to use a whole heap of Chigakonkwo. They haven't done that all season. So Calvin Ridley is a very, very solid start. He's a wide receiver too for me. Do I feel good about any other Titans? Not really, no. I think Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, I mean, he has one bad week, doesn't score a touchdown, and everyone's suddenly like, oh no, what happened? I'm like, this dude's had more than 3 receptions once in the last 9 weeks. He's just scored 8 times in that period. So he is what he is. He's touchdown or bust. If you are willing to take that risk, then absolutely go for him. There's a good chance he scores this week relative to most other players, but there's also a good chance he busts. So do it if you need to.
Yeah, I will say this. Like, if you dive into the individual teams that they have faced, like every good receiver goes off against the Titans, like plays well against the Titans per se. Like even last week, Brian Thomas, 8 for 86. The week prior was Terry McLaurin, 8 for 73 and 2. Tank Dell and also Nico Collins had double digits. Granted, Tank Dell only 3 for 72, but Dell really hasn't been good recently. So that was one of his better games recently. And then prior to that, Addison and Jefferson both had 14 PPR points. So it looks like to me when they face good receivers, the good receivers play well. So that's why I'm good with T. Higgins. I know Jamar Chase, don't even forget about it. But T. Higgins, I think, will bounce back. Obviously, Joe Burrow, this is another thing. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. But Joe Burrow was saying this week, like, I love T. Higgins. We got to figure out a way to keep him around. And he just came off a bad game. I have a feeling that this is going to be a week where they give him a little more extra love to help them kind of continue this late season run, maybe even make the back end of the playoffs if possible. On the other side, listen, Calvin Ridley's auto start in this matchup. You got to love the matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. Maybe there's a little bit of a rivalry between the head coach and OC from the old days, and maybe they want to put up some points, obviously, in this game. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is definitely risky, but at the same time, like, Cincinnati has, let's see, I'm just curious, so I don't want to pull this up real quick, so I want to do it on the spot. Lamb last week, but prior to that, Calvin Austin and Pickens had double digits. McConkey and Johnson had double digits. The week prior to that, it was Bateman and Wallace, surprisingly. And then prior to that, it was Jacoby Myers, but also A.J. Brown-Smith. So there's been a lot of scenarios where two guys have played well. I think, listen, when you're talking about fantasy football redraft purposes, you're probably not starting Westbrook and Keeney. But DFS might be an option for you, too, as a dart throw. But if you have a deeper format, bring it to the show on Sunday. Maybe Nick Westbrook-Keeney could be a wide receiver 3 for you. All right, let's jump down to the Dolphins at Texans. No, on the defensive side of the football, the young really stud safety, Jalen Pietri is out for the Texans. That could help a little bit as the Texans are home. So honestly, the Texans and C.J. Stroud have played better at home. Can there be fireworks in the dome there, Ben, between the Dolphins and Texans?
I'm really upset about Jalen Pietri being out. I've got him in a 32-team IDP league, and I need him this week. He is an IDP god. It's very disappointing that he's not playing. As for everyone else in this game, I think this is going to be a very good game for wide receivers. We've seen the Dolphins concede a lot more points to wide receivers recently. You're always starting Nico Collins. He's a top 5 option, even in a tough matchup. As for everyone else on the Texans, I mean, I just can't trust Tank Dell. I haven't been able to trust Tank Dell for weeks. He's someone that you're starting if you're desperate, but if you're in the playoffs, you probably have better options with no bye weeks around. So Dell's someone I would rather sit if I've got the choice. As for the Dolphins, I think this gets really interesting. I think Tyreek Hill, very solid option in a top 5 matchup against the Texans. And I also think Jalen Waddle is a viable start as well. He is kind of close to the top 30 for me. I talked about him a couple of weeks ago when we talked about guys that we were targeting for the playoffs. He kind of went off a little bit earlier than I expected. He always goes well against the Jets. We talk about that all the time.
It's weird, man.
I know Bobby is a massive fan of Jalen Waddle. He talks about this all the time. Look, that kind of happened a little bit early, but, we go off early sometimes, and that doesn't mean we can't, bring it back and that Waddle can't have a good game in Week 15.
Yeah, actually, I mean on Waddle too. Just look at the just over the last few weeks.
Whoa. Yeah, you're in on Jalen Waddle?
Yeah, listen, I'm very practical. I just don't believe this whole he's a wide receiver 2 every week. His whole there's an aura Waddle is. I have to believe in the matchup to start Waddle. As soon as I don't believe, I'm out. He's not an auto start to me at all. This is a matchup where you're going to start Jalen Waddle. Just look at the duos that have been good against the Houston Texans over the last few weeks. Jacksonville Jaguars, Parker freaking Washington had freaking 22 points with Brian Thomas scoring 18. Then the week prior, both Ridley and Westbrook-Keeney had 12 fantasy points. Turpin and freaking CeeDee Lamb had 17 and 18 fantasy points against this defense. So that's 3 straight weeks. And then back in week 9, it was Garrett Wilson and Adams both had 22 PPR points. So if I could see that the duos could do it, I'm in. So I'm good with Waddle there. On the flip side, the question is, am I good with Tank Dell because Nico's an auto start? But that one's a little – I mean, listen, we just saw last week the Jets have both Adams and Garrett Wilson where they both kind of went off against the Dolphins. So, I think this is one of those where I'm going to say come to the Sunday show because it depends, but yes, there's a case that you could start him. I mean, listen, Miami has allowed, Miami's a tougher matchup, but I think this might be a higher scoring game. So auto start, I would start Waddle over Tank Dell, but Tank Dell is a possible streamer in that game. All right, let's jump down to the next one, folks. Ravens.
One more on that.
Go ahead.
One more on the Dolphins. Someone I forgot to mention, OBJ got released, so Malik Washington now becomes an every down starter in the slot. The Texans concede a lot of points to the slot. Malik Washington, desperation streaming option.
Love it. DFS, baby. Get it done. GPP. We love every second of it. How dare you bury the lead? We were about to talk about my New York Giants, and you didn't let me get into it, as I couldn't be more excited to start every single Ravens possibility ever in this game. On offense, Theo Johnson for the Giants is out. And of course, the Taglione, freaking Danny DeVito. Tommy DeVito will be starting this week. And Danny DeVito. Hopefully Danny DeVito's there representing. Tommy DeVito will get the start. Ravens should have 18 sacks in this game. On the defense side of the ball, well, let's just say there's a lot of injuries to that Giants secondary. Corbin, they're going to be missing their slot corner, one of their outside corners, and one of their safeties. So 3 of their 5 starters in the back end. I think a lot of people will assume that Derrick Henry's just going to dominate this game, and possibly, but I do feel pretty confident that Zay Flowers will get his. What's your thoughts about this matchup?
I mean, I'm kind of inclined to agree with the people in saying that Derrick Henry will probably dominate this game, but I think you're still going to have a good chance of Zay Flowers scoring. I think even Rashad Bateman is a viable streamer because there's going to be points in this game. Vegas has the Ravens as 16.5-point favorites, which means they're expecting a lot of points for the Ravens. Those points have to come from somewhere. And obviously, guys like Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely have upside to score. But traditionally, in games they're winning, they don't tend to use their tight ends anywhere near as much. They tend to lean on their wide receivers. So that would mean that guys like Flowers and Bateman, and knowing our luck, probably Nelson Aguilar, has some real touchdown upside. As for the Giants, I mean, you can start Malik Neighbors. You kind of have to start Malik Neighbors. The Ravens have traditionally been a really good wide receiver matchup. They're getting a little bit better in the last few weeks, though part of that's been situational. I think Tommy DeVito is more likely to get things going than Drew Lock is. I think we've seen the evidence of that the last few weeks, and we said that weeks ago when they started DeVito over Lock. DeVito is the guy you want if you've got Giants wide receivers, but that doesn't mean I want to start anyone that's not Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, I think Neighbors is probably a wide receiver 3. He's not your typical top 24 guy because, the Ravens have turned it. They've turned a corner. This is going to be a disaster. I'm already excited to watch it. But the one thing I will say is the Giants defense is playing hard. Last week we saw that, and they're actually not a great matchup for wide receivers. They do lean towards the slot. So that's why I think Zay Flowers gets about 40% of his production on the inside this season. So I'm okay with Zay Flowers. I'm not going to probably touch anybody. I'm not going to get cute. Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, Ravens defense. Let's have some fun out there. And then honestly, I think Wan'Dale Robinson is probably someone you should definitely try to avoid. If you have him in a deeper league and you have to start him as a wide receiver 3, I would try to get – I'm personally not going to start him in a really tough slot matchup against the Ravens. All right, let's jump down to the Jets and Jags. So there's some really fun stuff coming out of Aaron Rodgers' camp, folks. He's having a hell of a time down there against Miami. Threw for 300 yards for the first time in a long time, so good for him. Evan Ingram was the biggest notable name on offense that will be out for this game. That could be really impactful for Brian Thomas. Parker Washington, maybe a deeper name. But DJ Reed, outside cornerback, opposite of Sauce Gardner, is out this week. So that should be notable. Sauce does not travel. He stays on one side. So that should definitely help Brian Thomas. What's your thoughts about this matchup this week, Ben?
I mean, traditionally, when you take on the Jets, you are targeting the slot. But that's Devin Duvernay. And I don't think that anyone's really looking at the Jaguars and going, yes, Devin Duvernay is who I'm sending out of my fantasy playoffs. I think that Brian Thomas is the only Jag you can feel good about starting this week. I think we saw last week what Parker Washington can be, which is absolutely nothing, or potentially have the random good week. This is not the week for that good week, though. I feel like with Gardner out, there's a good chance they just target Thomas. The lack of Evan Ingram does open up some more targets, but if anything, I feel like that just gives me a little bit more confidence in the running backs that they're going to run the ball a lot more than they normally would. As for the Jets, I mean, you can definitely target the Jags out wide. I do feel like you can feel confident in starting both Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams this week. As for Alan Lazard, he goes into that same category as the other guys. No way.
Yeah, the Jags, this is another one where, like, early on in the season, the Jags were an absolute dumpster fire. But they have, obviously Nico dominated them. But last week, Ridley didn't play well, 7 for 59. I guess he was fine in PPR. So that was an interesting kind of flub. Amon-Ra had a monster game against them in week 11. So I guess that's that. But Justin Jefferson, only 5 for 48. Kind of weird. You'd think Jefferson would just completely dominate them. So, listen, I think that Aaron Rodgers has a point to prove. So I think you're right about that. I think from just a narrative standpoint, and by the way, the metric is still saying that the 70%, by the way, one of 7 teams to allow 70% of their fantasy points out wide this season. That's over the last 6 weeks. My apologies for the Jags. So you got to like that for Wilson and also Adams. On the flip side, I think Brian Thomas is going to play really well this week. I think the loss of Reed, and by the way, surprisingly, if you hop over to Razzball.com and check out some of our fun tools, over 40% of Brian Thomas's fantasy points have been in the slot this season. Believe it or not, 33% of his targets over the last 4 weeks has been in the slot. So he gets inside just enough. Also, with no Sauce traveling, honestly, I think he gets a lot of looks. I like Brian Thomas this week as well. All right, Cowboys at Panthers. Let's talk. No notable injuries, surprisingly, for this one. What are your thoughts here, Ben?
I mean, we talked about this a lot earlier. Start Lamb, stream Thielen, avoid everyone else, and definitely start the running backs. Chuba Hubbard, top 5 for me this week, maybe top 3. Rico Dowdle, right on the edge of the top 10. They're not names you normally see up there, but they're getting the full workload. They've got a heap of injuries to their backup running back, so this is a running back game for me. The only other guy of interest to me here, I think Jake Ferguson maybe has a solid game because the Panthers have conceded the most points to tight ends so far this season. So this is very much an avoid your wide receivers game and start the running backs and the Jake Fergusons of this world.
Yeah, I totally forgot we talked about this ad nauseum already. So I'm moving on. Bucks at Chargers. Honestly, I think this might be my most underrated game of the week. I know Justin Herbert's dealing with some injuries, but he practiced in full. Sounds like he's good to go. Now, they are dealing with some injuries. Ladd McConkey sounds like he should be back. They will be down Will Dissly, and lesser of an impact is Jalen Reagor, who's been kind of the number 3. So maybe we'll see a little more. Well, it's going to be probably Palmer, Quentin Johnson, but maybe we'll see a little more of DJ Chark on the outside because no Reagor, which I don't understand why he can't pass up Reagor, but that's another conversation for another day. Defensively, let's just say if you're a safety, you're probably not playing in this game. Gillum for the Chargers is out. We also have Winfield and Whitehead are both out. I actually think this is something that's going to be impactful. Stone Smart, let's try to stick to wide receivers here. I know, but he's another deeper name. What's your thoughts here about the matchup between the Chargers and Bucks?
Yeah, I just picked up Kayvon Merriweather in that same league where I don't have Jalen Petrie as my safety. So there's some IDP advice for you. As for wide receivers, start Mike Evans. And that's it for the Bucks. Don't touch the other guys, but start Mike Evans. As for the Chargers, that's where it gets a little bit more interesting. I think assuming Ladd McConkey plays, and he should, look, he's someone you just have to start at the moment. I feel like especially in PPR, but even in a half PPR, you can feel fine about starting him. I don't feel good about the others. I know that this should be a solid matchup. The Bucks do have a tendency of conceding points to wide receivers, and we have seen it throughout the season, but they're not as weak as they used to be. They used to be like the best wide receiver matchup in football. That's not the case anymore. Despite all their safety injuries and things like that, ultimately they're still just like an edge of the top 10 wide receiver matchup to me. So I am happy to start McConkey, but I don't feel good about Johnston, and I feel bad about Palmer. Palmer's success was purely due to McConkey being out. Now that he shifts back out wide, he played in the slot last week. I don't want to start Palmer, and Johnston is like a desperation stream for me. I do like Stone Smart, as you said. Yeah,
I think Ladd's an auto start. He's just one of those guys, and I love the fact that he kind of has that like CeeDee Lamb-esque role where he plays a lot inside, but he's basically just the number 1. Gets him away from like the outside cornerbacks and stuff like that, the better cornerbacks in football. But the one thing that I will say that Josh Palmer has become kind of the vertical threat, which I didn't really think of that, early on. Like over the last month, his ADOT has been 18 yards, and Tampa gets completely crushed vertically. They allow their top 3 in air yards allowed, and honestly, they allow a boatload of fantasy points. Still, I know they're a fringe top 10 for the matchup, but I do think that something like Quentin Johnson and Palmer. I know the hard part is who's going to get the targets this week. It's not, they're kind of flip-flopping a little bit. I mean, listen, as soon as we gave up on Quentin Johnson, he played well. And I just don't know I don't know what happened to Palmer. Why wasn't he better early on in the season? It was kind of weird how he took a complete back seat to Quentin Johnson. And now it's starting to look like, I know he played in the slot last week for the most part, but to me, I'm I was high on Palmer early. And he's starting to get a little bit they're starting to get him on the field a little more. I know they play a lot of 2 tight end sets, and that's a part of it. They love to have a fullback in there too for the running game. So maybe that's what some of it was. But I don't know, man. I guarantee you one of either Johnson or Palmer is going to probably have a decent game, and I just don't know who it's going to be. So that's the problem. It's tough to call, but honestly, if you're going to go take your shot, I think Palmer might get a long one in this game because of the safeties in the back both being out, his high ADOT, and that's how you really can attack the Buccaneers secondary. On the other side, it's just Mike Evans But I have to shout out Jalen McMillan. He scored 2 touchdowns last week. And the Chargers have completely nosedived against wide receivers. I mean, they're one of the better matchups now. And Jalen McMillan, man, I mean, honestly, he ran just as many routes last week as Mike Evans. So, there could be someone could talk to me into a wide receiver Jalen McMillan play. I'm down. You can flirt with me a little bit. Don't do it, but I'm telling you, folks, I think there's a DFS little sprinkle in there for me. All right, Colts, Broncos. Josh Downs should be back in this game. He's still questionable. On the defensive side, Riley Moss, the other number 2 outside cornerback, is out. So, listen, we just kind of saw the Broncos really – I don't know what happened. Patrick Surtain is wonderful, but it doesn't really matter. They are getting completely crushed by wide receivers. What's your thoughts about the Colts and Broncos?
Yeah, the Broncos are absolutely copping it at the moment. It's kind of wild. Look, just in the last, month, 2 months, all of a sudden the Broncos aren't that top 10 matchup that they used to be, like top 10 defense that they used to be. But they've still got Surtain. If Surtain was injured, it would make perfect sense. You go, well, of course, their best cornerback's gotten injured. Of course, they're getting torn up. It might even be because the offense is improving and therefore teams are having to throw on them a little bit more. Regardless, I still find it really hard to feel good about any of the Colts. We know that Josh Downs is their number 1 guy when he's healthy, but he's more of a slot guy. And it is hard to feel good about the slot players against the Broncos because you can generally target them out wide. Does that mean you can suddenly start Michael Pittman? Well, for me, he's more of a flex guy. I feel like you can stream Michael Pittman this week. I feel like you can feel okay about him. But with Anthony Richardson, I just don't feel as good as I did with Joe Flacco. And I think Alec Pierce is like a desperation streamer. If you really need someone like a Nick Westbrook-Akine who can make some big plays, who can get you some points because you're a long way behind in a deeper league, then someone like an Alec Pierce is interesting. As for the Broncos, you start Courtland Sutton, and a lot of people are going to be tempted to start Devon Vele because we forget after their bye week, but back in week 13, he had a big week, but he actually wasn't playing starter snaps. He was still only out there about 60% of the time. He just happened to be the guy that got all the targets. It could be someone totally different this week. They're cycling everyone but Courtland Sutton. So Sutton's a starter. Vele's more of a stash for me. I want to see him do it again before I'm willing to put him out there.
What about Josh Downs?
I feel fine about Josh Downs if he's healthy. And the if he's healthy is the bit that really scares me because I'm not convinced that he is. But if he is going to play fully starter snaps, then he is a wide receiver 3 option for me. It does seem like he'll probably play because he was full practice on Thursday, but I'm still watching out for any reports heading into the game that he might potentially be limited because I think that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Josh Downs is kind of the guy where it's listen, I know Surtain hasn't necessarily shadowed, and they also play a lot of zone, so I'm not overly concerned about the outside matchups, but Elijah Moore had a really strong game last week out of the slot. And Josh Downs is, I believe, the guy for Anthony Richardson when healthy. So I just called my shot here. I think Downs is a guy where oh, man. The funny part is I have Downs in a lot of leagues. So I'm do I want to start Downs over a JSN or CeeDee Lamb? And I'm I can't necessarily get there, but I kind of want to because of the matchups a little bit. But that's but I still think he's worth considering. I think kind of we saw Ray McLeod get double-digit fantasy points. Guys like Zay Flowers who play a lot in the slot do well. So I think Josh Downs might be okay. And then Broncos for me is more just when you're looking at the matchup, they are a true out wide funnel defense for the Colts. And so that means Courtland Sutton's the guy you want there. So I'm good with Courtland Sutton as well. All right, Patriots at Cardinals. Let's see what we got. Timestamp, 39 minutes in, folks. Look at that. No notable injuries, Ben. Talk to us. Any players you're kind of excited to start in this one?
I really want Marvin Harrison Jr. to finally have a good week again. He had this run of about 9 games that were all bottom 10 wide receiver matchups. And he was okay in a couple of them. For the most part, he struggled. And I was like, well, that's okay. Because he's coming into some better matchups now, and he's continued to struggle, and that's really frustrating. We expect him to do better against the Seahawks, and he busted twice against them. Can he do it now against the Patriots? The Cardinals, just in general, their passing game's not looking very good. Trey McBride will definitely get his. He's going to get a heap of targets, but we should be seeing a lot more out of Marvin Harrison Jr., and it's just not happening, and it's really frustrating. So he's more of a wide receiver 3 for me. I thought he would be higher up. I thought he would be a good player to have in the playoffs, but it's just not looking that way. So he's someone I would feel okay about flexing, but don't expect a lot from him. As for the Patriots, I mean, nah, like it's just not it. Like, don't start Patriots wide receivers.
Yeah, the only guy that kind of if you're in a deeper league in PPR is Mario Douglas. Does have a really nice matchup against that Arizona secondary that allows a lot of fantasy points to the slot. Guys like JSN have played well against them, so that's just something notable. New England is kind of an interesting matchup because they do allow a decent amount of fantasy points out wide over the last 6 weeks. And if you're looking at like kind of you almost like a Michael Pittman last week or 2 weeks ago, my apologies. So he had like 5 catches for 42 yards, not good, but I feel like that's kind of like the floor for Harrison. But then you look at Jalen Waddle, he went bonkers against them. Puka Nacua, monster game against them. So like the good receivers, like some defenses are schemed well, but they don't have the talent, and when they face good receivers, they get beat. Listen, I think that there's a narrative here that I think that Marvin Harrison still could give you wide receiver 2 numbers. So another good name to bring to the show on Sunday, because I do think there's a way you can get him in your lineups, and I think Mario Douglas, let's call my shot, 10 PPR points this week. I'm excited for that not to happen. All right, Lions at Bills at Lions for this one. Some key notable guys returning. Dalton Kincaid and Keenan Coleman look to be back this week. But Rasul Douglas, outside quarterback for the Bills, will be out. So that's a notable one for the Bills defense. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
This is juicy. This game should be really, really fun. I'm looking forward to this one. I'm expecting a lot of points. The problem is both teams have a heap of weapons, so it's really hard to know exactly where the points are going to go. You know that Amon-Ra St. Brown is someone you have to start. I know he's been disappointing in general this season, but I think that's probably because he was drafted a little bit too high more than anything else. I think Jamison Williams is someone you can feel okay about. It is really hard to pass to outside receivers on the Bills, and yet I still feel like Williams could potentially have a big game. He always has that upside. As for the Bills receivers, I mean, Khalil Shakir is their number 1 guy, and he is a solid option, but behind that, it becomes really iffy. Keon Coleman coming back makes it really difficult for all the outside receivers because they will still have Mac Hollins out there plenty of the time, and Amari Cooper isn't running full snaps. So Cooper's the only other guy that I would feel okay about for the wide receivers, but even then he's more of like a desperation flex guy rather than someone I feel really good about starting. I don't think you can start Coleman first week back, and this takes Hollins totally out of the game again.
So the interesting Buffalo is not an air yards defense. They definitely you beat them at yards after the catch. If you're looking at the matchup as a whole, like they're a slot. So the Bills are a big time slot funnel defense. It screams Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like this is an Amon-Ra St. Brown week against Buffalo. I mean Cooper Kupp, who just threw up a donut, had a decent game against them last week. It's home as well. You always love when the Lions are home, especially in December. You feel a lot more confident. I think I would be a little hesitant to start Jamison Williams, but I do think that him being at home keeps him in the wide receiver 3 discussion because he plays a lot better at home than he does on the road. On the flip side for Buffalo, I think it's probably going to be, you know what? I actually think that Amari Cooper, it's going to be hard to justify trading for him and not getting him on the field. And I think we started seeing him develop that chemistry finally. And I think if they're back in the dome again, I think he's a very underrated play in this game. So I think he's going to be a solid performance against Detroit, who I think, by the way, when they get in these shoes, I think this is going to be a fun game. So I think Khalil Shakir has gotten to a point in PPR where you're always going to feel comfortable with him, especially in that format as a wide receiver 3. But I think Amari Cooper is one guy that I actually like a lot in this game because of the matchup as well. All right, Steelers at Eagles. George Pickens out, Dallas Goedert out. On the defensive side of the ball, the Steelers will be down one of their starting safeties. What's your thoughts about the Steelers at Eagles?
It's really hard to start wide receivers against the Steelers. They're so good at stopping the pass that you can never feel good about anybody. Devonta Smith, for me, is someone I really struggle to get in lineups this week. He's going to be outside my top 30. I mentioned earlier I would start Adam Thielen over him, and I stand by that. I just feel like with Smith, he's the fourth option in this offense, potentially third or fourth option, depending on whether you consider Jalen Hurts his own option. So it's just really hard to trust him for that reason. AJ Brown's even struggled the last few weeks, but you still kind of have to start him. I have had a lot of people asking me AJ Brown versus insert wide receiver 2 here. I'm still starting AJ Brown. He's just got so much upside in any matchup. He can go for over 100 yards and a touchdown. So for me, he's a must start. As for the Steelers, with no George Pickens, I'm starting none of them. Just none of them at all in any circumstance. I'm not touching the Steelers.
A.J. Brown is an auto start, in my opinion. If you just look at the outside receivers against Pittsburgh, Jerry Jeudy, back-to-back games, both 14 fantasy points. Chase, 20. T. Higgins, 17. All in PPR, of course. Even Terry McLaurin, 16 fantasy points. So really strong. Like when you have a good outside receiver, they beat him. And so I think A.J. Brown to me is he's in. I'm not stressed about him at all. Devonta Smith is where things get a little like that's where I'm like, I still think if you want an upside, you got to think T. Higgins and also Jamar Chase, what they did 2 weeks ago. I think the problem is that when you take away George Pickens, the Steelers are no longer as explosive as they should be. And so that could make the game a little more like Saquon Barkley, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren type. So I'm all in on A.J. Brown, not stressed about him, especially with the squeaky wheel. A lot of squeakiness going on right now. So I think he might have a good game in this one. And then on the Pittsburgh side, any sleeper guys? I mean, is there Mike Williams, Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, no one floating your boat? All right, we're moving on. Nothing's floating Ben's boat.
Nobody at all. It's sinking fast.
Sinking fast. But
it's literally pouring with rain outside. It's literally sinking fast.
If you want to call your shot, 45% of Eagles fantasy points come in the slot. That's Calvin Austin territory. That is not an endorsement to start the man, but if you wanted something, a narrative, that's your narrative. All right, Packers, Seahawks, Sunday Night Football. Let's talk about Jair Alexander and one of their safeties will be out in this game, so they're dealing with some injuries on the Packers secondary. What's your thoughts about this matchup, Ben?
Is it possible that the Seahawks defense is suddenly good?
Yes.
I think it might be. Because they have started to shut down teams all of a sudden. They used to be a matchup we would kind of target a little bit. Even on the season, they have dropped into the bottom half of wide receiver matchups, and they definitely were a top 10 matchup only a few weeks ago. They've been really good recently. It's hard to trust any of the Packers. Reed's really gone down recently. He's always been a risky guy because he's only ever played in 11 personnel. So it's always difficult to start Jaden Reed. It's even harder this week with the Seahawks improving. It's not like it's a bad slot matchup. It's just a tough situation to trust. As for Christian Watson, I was really excited about him coming into this, but now Romeo Doubs is back. And the issue with Romeo Doubs being back is that Dontavian Wicks, who had moved out to that Z receiver role, will come back to split with Christian Watson. So Christian Watson goes from being an every down X receiver, which is the receiver position you want to be in for the Packers, to splitting with Wicks again. And it's not going to be a massive drop. I still think Watson plays 70% of snaps probably, but that means you're losing like a third of the fantasy points or fantasy point potential that you could have gotten previously. Wicks hasn't looked very good. Watson has looked good, but even that smallest amount of snaps is going to make a big difference. So Watson goes from someone I felt pretty good about to being kind of like a, if you have to, streamer or flex kind of guy. Same with Reed. As for the Seahawks, got to start Metcalf, got to start JSN. You don't have to start Lockett.
Yeah. You're right about the Seahawks, D, and you're just walking through some of the stuff. Like they held down Marvin Harrison last week. Michael Wilson found the end zone, only had 2 catches. The week prior, Devontae Adams had the good game, but he's kind of operating more out of the slot, which is reflecting in the numbers. But then you keep going back. Jawan Jennings, Cooper Kupp, the guys that had really nice games were slot guys. Khalil Shakir. But now when you start going further and further back, that's when the Seahawks defense wasn't playing well. So I will say that it's hard to trust Jaden Reed, but the law of averages say that he'll have at least some level of production this week. He's not going to put up a donut, but granted, he should have been good last week against Detroit. So honestly, way too risky, not worth it to me. I think that I'd probably try to avoid that Packers defense, Packers wide receivers if I could. JSN has kind of earned his man, I hate saying it, but like he's earned his number one receiver title on that offense. He's kind of outproduced. But if you just look at the slot guys against this defense, I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 5 for 43 last week. Juwan Jennings, 5 for 40. Well, that was the snow game, so that doesn't count. Keenan Allen, 4 for 41. It's not overly exciting. Like, I don't know if JSN's like a slam dunk for me this week. I think I'm still starting him because of it, but maybe I view him more as a wide receiver, like low-end wide receiver too, versus what he's been all season. I think DK is kind of an interesting name. If you're looking at the guys who've really beat them up, I mean, Tim Patrick and Jamison Williams are one of the ones last week. Tyreek Hill had the fluky catch, but DJ Moore had a good game. Honestly, I think that DK might have a solid matchup with no Jair Alexander as well. All right, let's jump down to the next one, Monday Night Football. Bears at Vikings. We got Stephon Gilmore's questionable with the hamstring he missed last week. We're still waiting to see what the final results are of all that. We don't know about the Monday Night Football game's injury reports just yet. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
I mean, traditionally, you've really attacked the Vikings any wide receivers playing against the Vikings because they've conceded the most points to wide receivers this season, but not so much in the last 6 weeks. They're strangely like middle of the pack recently. It's not so much that they've improved. It's just been a little bit matchup. They've improved a little bit, but I still think you can feel okay about starting Bears guys against them. I would happily start a DJ Moore. I feel like he's like on the cusp of being a wide receiver 2 option. But can you risk it with a Keenan Allen or a Rome Odunze? I don't think I can. I don't think that I feel confident enough that they're going to be the guys that get the targets. One of them probably will. But picking which one and relying on how much they're going to get is very risky. As for the Vikings, I mean, it's a tough matchup. The Bears are very good against wide receivers. I feel fine about Justin Jefferson because he's Justin Jefferson. I don't feel fine about Jordan Addison. I would be holding him on my bench waiting for a better week. He's someone you should definitely pick up if he's available because he's still available in many leagues. But you can't start him this week. Hold him for week 16 and 17 when he's going to be good.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is you're not ever questioning Justin Jefferson. We're not worried about that. Addison, on the other hand, the Bears aren't an A-dot defense. They are not a defense where you beat vertically. They have allowed not that much air yards this season. But I will say this, that Addison at least is in the dome in Minnesota, and we just kind of saw that blaring upside last week against the Falcons. But this is a little bit of a different animal with the Bears D, who I think is still decent. I know they allowed a lot of points to a lot of production to the 49ers on the road last week. But a lot of that, George Kittle, Juwan Jennings, a lot of slot work. So, honestly, I think that Jefferson's the only auto start here. And same thing with DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore is obviously fine. I think that the Vikings defense is solid. But if Stephon Gilmore is out, we did see that Atlanta game, granted, the Vikings blew them out. But, there was a lot of fun for the Falcons, too. So, I think that I'm excited about DJ Moore as well. I agree with you there. All right, last game, Falcons at Raiders. Still waiting on Aiden O'Connell, see what the deal is there. The defense for the Raiders has really turned on. Surprisingly so. They've lost they had some injuries to their secondary. I was like, man, this is going to be great for the offenses. But really, the Raiders are just playing tough football right now. What's your thoughts about this matchup?
I mean, the Raiders were a really tough wide receiver matchup for a while. They have conceded a few more wide receiver points recently because of those injuries, but they're still playing solidly. Having said that, I'm still starting Drake London in pretty much every single league. He's a top 10 option for me. Darnell Mooney, he's kind of been forgotten about because he had a couple of poor weeks, but realistically, he's still a very good starting option. Darnell Mooney, someone that I would happily start. He'll be like a high to mid wide receiver 3 for me. I'd put him in the same category as someone like a Khalil Shakir or a Jacoby Myers or someone like that, where you feel like there's plenty of upside. Jalen Waddle's another one who's close, where there's plenty of upside, but ultimately they're still the wide receiver 2 on their team, so there's naturally comes with some risk. As for the Raiders guys, I mean, Jacoby Myers, he is the guy that they've been going to, but he is ultimately the number 2 receiver because Brock Bowers is the number 1 guy. And one thing you know about the Falcons defense in general is that you can definitely pass on them, be it to the tight ends or be it to the wide receivers. You can pass on the Falcons. Plus, they don't really have clear starting running backs at the moment. So I do think we can not only feel good about Bowers, obviously, but we can feel good about Jacoby Myers. He is a solid low-end start for me this week as well. As for the guys below him, guys like Trey Tucker, guys like Ray McLeod, not particularly interested in them this week.
Yeah, I think Myers is in. If Aiden O'Connell somehow figures out a way to start this game, I'm going to feel a lot better about Myers. And honestly, even Desmond Ridder. I know Ridder isn't exciting, but listen, he played a lot of games last year. And listen, Drake London had moments. And if he can't, by the way, a revenge game, if you can't get amped up for that, Desmond, then I don't know what you can get amped up. By the way, on the flip side, I will not take any Sincere McCormick slander. He is the RB1. He is going to be fantastic down the stretch. RB2 rest of the way. I'm excited for some Sincere McCormick. Touchdown upside might be a little meh. Not really excited there, but it is what it is. On the flip side, though, I think, listen, London does play a lot in the slot. He does get a lot of fantasy points from the inside, and I think that's where you're going to want to beat that Raiders defense. But Nate Hobbs should be back, who handles the slot, but he's been banged up. They're also dealing with some injuries on the outside. Listen, this is a dome game, folks. I like this game. I'm starting Mooney. I'm starting Myers as long as Aiden O'Connell, and I'm still okay with him with Ridder. Probably more of a wide receiver 3 in that case. But that's all we got for all the games, folks. Only 56 minutes in. Let's get to some comments here before we end the show. We got Jose Rodriguez, 2 running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 flex, Lamb, Evans, AJ, Connor, Mixon, Charbonnet, Dowdle, and Hall. It is a 1-team league. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
Is it PPR? Do we know? We do not know. Okay.
Soon have.
I would say that you absolutely have to start Mixon. You should be starting Evans, AJ, and we can't start Lamb if we're starting those 2. So AJ and Evans, and I would start Mixon and Connor.
So you're not starting your boy Charb with no Walker potentially in the game.
I mean, I've got Connor 10, Dowdle 11, and Charbonnet 12. And so they're all really close. Probably if it's I still start Connor.
Yeah, I'm going to go Charb, Mixon, Connor, AJ, and Evans for me. Hall's knee injury scares me off a little bit. Not really excited for that one. Dowdle's nice. I do, but he's on the road against Carolina. I know it's a really good matchup, but Dowdle, I just don't think he the upside, some of these guys are just big time names. Connor's just like a workhorse. I know his production hasn't been amazing, but I still view him as he's one of those very few guys that gets such a big workload that it's hard to sit him. And Mixon's just an auto start. So Evans, AJ, Connor, Mixon, Charbonnet for me, as long as there's no Walker. Jamie, that's okay, man. He missed the first part of the episode. Building Legos with my kid. You know what? There's only I think there's a list of maybe 3 to 5 things you could be late for. Building Legos with the kids is on the list. So congratulations, Jamie. You're off the hook. Do you remember those 4 catches Flowers had against Denver? I don't know. So I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure it happened. Jamie's been on the ball, and we do appreciate that. Obviously, he's back in the playoffs, so that's good. In the playoffs, I made the playoffs in my 1-team league. Haven't lost yet. Congratulations, Jamie. 1-team league playoff. God bless you, buddy. We love every second of that. Ben, before we close out the show, tell the people what you got going on everywhere they can find your content.
Hey, as always, rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. My articles, which you need to be reading. You should be reading all the articles on Razzball. If you're not, what are you doing? Over at football.razzball.com.
Sure.
And if you want to hear me just talk through my rankings, that'll be up within the next 24 hours or so, depending on when I get home tomorrow, over at my YouTube channel at Fantasy First Down. But you should always, as always, be checking out all the tools, all the articles over on Razzball, because that's how we get our rankings so accurate, and that's how we do it over here.
Yeah, appreciate that, man. Honestly, make sure you join us this Sunday live for 2 hours before kickoff as we do our Sunday live start shit show. And check out all the great tools and resources over on Razzball.com. I want to thank my co-host again, Ben Wazzy. Go follow me at Fantasy First Down on Twitter. And myself, if you have the time, at Bobby Lamarco. We are out of here, folks.